Canada, a country with no gold. I'm Brian Lilley with the Rebel.media. It looks like a shocking headline, and I know that many of you emailed me about it. Canada has sold off its gold reserves. Is it a shock? Are we being ripped off? Is this going to hurt the Canadian dollar? There's lots of questions, and I'm going to try and answer all of them to the best of my ability. But let me say, first off, it's not actually very big news because Canada has had so little in the way of gold reserves for some time. Most of it was sold off during the Mulroney and Chrétien years, a bunch during the earlier Trudeau era. Now, Justin Trudeau's new government is just finishing the job. Let's say clearly that there's no way this should have an impact on the Canadian dollar because the Canadian dollar hasn't been backed by gold since the depths of the Great Depression. Canada left the gold standard in 1933. That's almost 40 years before the Americans abandoned it in 1971. Since then, Canada has been a fiat currency. Traders decide the value of the currency, not the amount of gold in federal vaults. So why do we have gold reserves then? Well, those reserves were part of what's called the Exchange Fund Account. It was established by the Bank of Canada in 1935 to hold the liquid assets of the government. The account's held at the central bank for the Minister of Finance, and this is where international reserves such as US dollars, euros, or yen are held. Now, in February, there were other shocking headlines stating things like Canada was selling off more than half of its gold reserves, but that was selling off, well, half of a very little amount, less than 3 tons, I'm told. And then you consider that back in the 1960s, Canada, even though we weren't on the gold reserves, Canada had more than 1,000 tons of gold. By 1985, it was less than half of that. Then by the time Chrétien left office, it was down to next to nothing, with small, regular sell-offs happening all the time. So the government, in this latest International Reserves Report, officially says it has no gold at all. What happened to the gold? What happened to the money? Well, that's what I asked the Finance Department. Spokesman Jack Aubrey told me via email that the government was down to selling off some gold coins. Canada is gradually disposing of a small number of gold coins whose value is under $500,000. The government has a long-standing policy of diversifying its portfolio by selling physical commodities, such as gold, and instead investing in financial assets that are easily tradable and that have deep markets of buyers and sellers. Now, I'm told the money, all of it, is going back into the international reserves. It's not being used in general revenues. It's not being used to prop up Trudeau's spending binge and deficits. But what price did they get? Well, they won't tell me. They just say it's market prices. Now, gold's been up a little bit in recent weeks. It's at about $1,263 an ounce last time I looked. That's still down from a high of nearly $1,800 an ounce a few years ago, meaning that just like in the Chrétien years, the government sold the gold at the wrong time. We got a bad price. Now, while I'm saying there's no reason to panic because we had so little gold to begin with, don't think I don't find this odd. This is very odd. Canada is still a major gold-producing nation. Some rankings put us as the 5th largest producer in the world. And our mining expertise, it's exported around the world. So we're big players in gold, and yet the government has no physical gold assets. The Royal Canadian Mint, which is also owned by the government, is one of the major producers of gold coins or gold products for investors. Their products are marketed more heavily in the United States than they are here in Canada, and yet the government that owns the mint has no gold reserves. On November 4th, 2015, the same day that the Trudeau government was sworn in, the Finance Department released the monthly International Reserves Report, and it showed that we had $110 million US worth of gold. A month later, that was down to $102 million US. By January, we were down to 58 million, and then, well, February it was down to 24 million. And then come March, well, you know the drill by now. It's down to 0. We have sold off all of the gold. There's absolutely nothing left for them to sell, unless they just haven't sold the gold coins, but they're not counting them anymore. It's puzzling, it's odd, and it's something that I'll keep looking into. But Canada long ago stopped being a major stockpiler of gold bullion or gold anything else. In looking back through the Harper years, I couldn't find any wild sell-offs. There were ups and downs in the value of gold as the price went up and down, but there were no wild sell-offs, no big chunks that I could see. Now, within 4 months of Trudeau taking office, all the gold is gone, sold off quickly, and the question is why. All I can say is we don't have all the answers yet.